Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. We had 3 games here on Monday. We saw 2 series go ahead and close out. The Celtics and Heat played their game 4. It was a fun night of playoff hoops, and one of those series that wrapped up was Lakers versus Nuggets. I want to go ahead and begin with that. Of course, we're going to talk about everything in this video, timestamps as always, but let's start off with LA versus Denver, which ended up being one of the most competitive 5-game series I've ever seen. It feels really similar to last year where the Lakers did get swept by the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals, but basically every game was really close. There were some ridiculous moments. This one, same exact thing. In Game 5, followed the classic Lakers versus Nuggets script that we've talked about a number of times here on the channel, where the Lakers build up a lead in the first quarter. If you had just watched the first quarter of all of these games, you would have thought the Lakers dominated in this series. In fact, if you watched a lot of this series where the Lakers led for about 70% of the minutes, you would have thought the Lakers won. However, the Nuggets always inevitably made a comeback. By the time the third quarter rolled around, the game was tied or they had a lead. The Lakers would do a little bit to keep it close, maybe even take a lead themselves, but then the Nuggets would find some way to go ahead and rip their hearts out for every game other than the Game 4 that the Lakers did end up winning. And for the second time this series, it was a Jamal Murray fadeaway jumper towards the end of the shot clock that ripped their hearts out. He hits it, the Nuggets go ahead. Taurean Prince has a heave from half court to try and go ahead and win it. No good, it's an air ball. This goes ahead and finishes the 5-game series with the Nuggets picking up a gentleman sweep of the Lakers. Jamal Murray led the way with 32 points, 3 rebounds, 7 assists, hitting 5 threes. It was easily the best game of the series from him, as well as the second game winner coming from him in the span of a few games. I don't know if that's ever happened before, that a player had 2 game winners in the same series, but Jamal Murray just always seems to step up for these big moments. Jokic had 25, 20, and 9 on 58% shooting. Did have 7 turnovers. It didn't even feel like the most dominant Jokic game ever, which is crazy that a near 25, 20, 10 triple-double isn't even an insane Jokic game at this point. Michael Porter Jr. was amazing with 26 points, 4 rebounds, hitting 5 threes. KCP had a moment where he went down with an injury, did end up coming back in the game and finishing it out. So hopefully he's good to go for next series because they're really going to need him. Going up against the Minnesota Timberwolves, a second-round matchup I've been really hoping we were going to see. We're going to get it. It will be a slugfest. You've got 2 really physical, big teams that have a lot of size, a lot of length. They played each other really well throughout the regular season. I cannot wait. The Nuggets are going to have to be better than they were in this series to beat Minnesota because the Wolves just cruised into the second round, knocking out the Suns easily in a sweep. And the Nuggets did win in 5 games, but it was never really the prettiest. Jamal Murray has to be a bit more consistent. They've got to get better play from the bench. I think it's a kind of coin flip type of series. I'm really excited for it. A series preview for that will be coming within the next few days, so make sure to stay tuned to the channel if you want to see that. Then we get to the Lakers, who have now endured back-to-back years of this, where they actively competed with the Nuggets in a series, but only found a way to get 1 win through 9 playoff games over the past couple of years. Last year was the Western Conference Finals, and now they've regressed to a first-round exit. And I'm sure there are going to be some people that argue if they got a different matchup, if they didn't have such a bad start to the season, they could have been a higher seed and made it further. Yeah, maybe, but that's all hypotheticals. What we know right now is they're sitting in Cancun. Braun was great in this game. He had 30 points, 9 rebounds, 11 assists, 4 steals. Anthony Davis was great, although he did get hurt in this game, which doesn't really matter at this point, but it affected his performance and the Lakers' ability to dominate down the stretch a little bit. 17 points, 15 rebounds, 4 assists from him. Reaves had 19 points. Felt like this was a pretty good game from him, although he was getting torched defensively, never been his strong suit. Same thing with Rui and D'Lo, who had 15 and 14 on kind of rough efficiency. Neither one of them defended particularly well. The Lakers did enough to keep it close, but there's just too many holes in this roster and not enough to overcome the Nuggets that, again, just always perfectly execute down the stretch. They're much more well-rounded. They work as a unit, where the Lakers oftentimes throughout the year felt very disjointed. There felt like there was a bit of a rift between the coaching staff and the players. It was ultimately a failure of a season. And I know nobody was picking them to beat the Nuggets. I wasn't expecting that from them, but at the very least, I thought they would go out there and compete with the best of the best. I picked them to be like a top 4-3 seed, I think, in the Western Conference. I liked their offseason. I felt like this was going to be a year where the Lakers really built off last year's Western Conference Finals appearance, and instead, they go out 2 rounds earlier to the exact same opponent and only grab 1 more win in the process. And this all sets up one of the most interesting off seasons for any team in the league. We know Darvin Ham is almost surely gone. There was a Shams report that came out like the second the game ended saying that his job is in jeopardy. It's pretty unlikely he's coming back. It talked about how he lost the faith of the players. There was one game where, it was the game where LeBron went crazy against the Clippers in the final few minutes, where the players felt like they had to drop the game plan because Darvin Ham didn't know what to do. He kept having LeBron go at Kawhi Leonard rather than like getting the switch on Daniel Tice. I personally, just from, watching outside the organization, was pretty unimpressed with him. I feel like a lot of his rotations didn't make sense, especially early in the season where they changed up their starting lineup a number of times. They weren't letting anybody get into a rhythm. Throughout this series, I felt like his rotations were weird against the Nuggets, his splitting of minutes, his lack of timeouts in big runs. I don't blame them if they fire Darvin Ham, but if they're going to fire him, they have to nail this next coaching hire because now this is 2 coaches fired in the span of a few years, and it's probably your last chance to get the coach right in the LeBron James era. You can't bring in another guy who you're just going to fire after 1 to 2 years. This has to be the coach for the long term. Otherwise, it's just too much turnover. But much more pressing than the coaching situation is the LeBron James situation. After the game, he was asked by a reporter if this could be his last game in purple and gold, and he kind of smirked and said he wasn't going to answer that question, and in another answer said that right now he's just focused on Team USA and hanging out with his family over the summer, which makes sense. He was never going to reveal his hand as an upcoming free agent, but it does make things interesting. Imagine if LeBron left to go play with Bronny somewhere else, or just decide that the Lakers weren't the best spot for him to be. Everything comes completely crumbling down for LA, and they've immediately got to go into rebuild mode. Now, Shams did say in his article where he mentioned the Darvin Ham stuff that LeBron probably has about 2 years left playing in his career, and the Lakers feel pretty good about keeping LeBron. They would be willing to even draft Bronny if that convinces him to stay. They'll throw him the max amount of money that he wants. It's seemingly like LeBron is going to stay in Los Angeles. He also said that LeBron likes it there, that that's kind of where he wants to be, but that ultimately he is going to wait and see on what the Lakers do this offseason to try and build a team that gives him a great chance to win over his final few years. And that ultimately is what it all comes down to keep LeBron to push yourself forward, because even if you get him to stay, you're just a first-round exit. How do you revolutionize this roster? How do you build this thing forward to go from first-round exit to a team that can actively compete for a championship, which is the really difficult part for this team? There are 2 ways they could go about this. First, they could just try and improve the supporting cast around LeBron and AD as their sole stars. They try and flip players. They use some of their draft assets to bring in guys that are more complementary and are better two-way players. I feel like a lot of guys in this roster play one side of the ball or the other, and then maybe that combined with a new coach is enough to go ahead and bring them further than they've been. Or you go out there and make the star trade. You pursue the big name, add a guy to this team making a big 3, and then just trying to figure out the supporting cast on the fly. Guys that were already here that maybe didn't get as many minutes. You bring them in, you sign some minimum contracts. Probably going to retain some of the guys despite the star trade, and you try and make that thing work with, again, that new big 3 in town. People are very divided on this. Some people think a star trade is a massive mistake, and others think that it's a necessity to bring the Lakers back to championship contention. Let's first talk about the route where they don't go for the star and instead upgrade the overall supporting cast. I don't think it's necessarily terrible at the moment, but it clearly needs to improve to be on the level of some of the best teams in the NBA. I think D'Lo is probably going to end up leaving. He's got a player option. There were some issues with him in the franchise, specifically Darvin Ham throughout the year, so maybe if you fire him, you can get him to stay. But I don't know. To me, for some reason, it feels like D'Lo is going to go somewhere else, get a bag, and that does leave you without a point guard, but you still have plenty of players you can deal to try and make upgrades like Rui, Reaves, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, all have decent contracts that you can flip. You could combine 2 of them to try and make an upgrade for one good role player, or just do like 1-for-1 trades where you include draft capital, because they don't have a lot, but they have some with the 17th pick in this year's draft. Number 55, they've got their 2029 first-round pick, a 2031 first that theoretically could be tradable at some point soon, some second-round picks, a young player like Jalen Hood-Schifino they could try and deal. Max Christie is a free agent. They could bring him back. Taurean Prince, I imagine they'll bring him back as well. Spencer Dinwiddie, I'm not so sure about. They can combine all of these methods to, I believe, build out a pretty good supporting cast next to LeBron and AD. They've got to make the right moves. They have to bring in the right players, but this makes sense. I mean, to me, this may be the best route. This is what they did when they won a championship. It was LeBron and AD as the sole stars, and then just great role players like KCP, Alex Caruso, Danny Green, the list goes on and on. Dwight Howard was pretty good for them as well as a backup big. They just built out this great supporting cast of players that could shoot, that could defend with their 2 stars, and it worked. It won them a championship. So this is a proven route. It's one that I feel like they could definitely pursue, although, to be honest, I do expect them to try and go for the star trade. Trae Young is a name that was mentioned by Shams in his article as one of their top targets. We know they had discussions surrounding Dejounte Murray at the trade deadline as well, so a couple of guys in Atlanta that could potentially be available for them. We'll see what happens with the Cavaliers and Donovan Mitchell. Say they bow out in the first round to the Magic, or even if they do win that series, they just don't feel confident with re-signing Donovan Mitchell after the upcoming season. He says he won't sign an extension. Maybe he becomes available. Maybe a Paul George or James Harden are looking to switch spots in LA in like a sign-in trade because they're both free agents, although I don't imagine the Clippers are going to allow them to do that, so that's probably pretty unlikely, but those are just two more names we could talk about. Brandon Ingram could be available. Maybe there's a reunion to be had there if the Pelicans are willing to trade with the Lakers. Maybe something else huge pops up that we just don't really know about yet, because player movement happens a lot, I think, with CBA, financial implications coming into play for a lot of the teams coming up here, as well as a bunch of teams that really disappointed. I imagine we're going to see a lot of player movement, which is good for the Lakers. They want it to be a fluid league. They don't want a lot of teams that are going to stay in place because they have to go out there and make upgrades. The problem is with so many teams, I imagine, being interested in making splashes, it's going to be hard for them to get players to LA in particular, unless a guy specifically says, I want to be in Los Angeles, and it leads to a team kind of allowing themselves to take a weaker package to go into their star players' demands. The Lakers don't really have the best offer out of anybody for a top-name player. Like, for example, we've heard that the Jazz may be aggressive in trying to pursue top players this season. They've got 1 billion draft picks and some really interesting young players. The Houston Rockets feel like they're poised to try and go out there and splash for a star, and they've got like Jalen Green, who just had a great second-half breakout of the season, Cam Whitmore, a bunch of other young players who are interesting, 1 million draft picks. If the Thunder want to make a big splash, they're probably at the top of the food chain for that. Even some of the other top-level teams that are trying to maybe add another player, like say the Pelicans, if they don't want to keep Brandon Ingram on this team, they want to bring in a new player next to Zion. They have young players that are interesting. Ingram himself is still relatively young and a star-level player. They've got 1 billion draft picks from the Bucks coming up who are falling apart at the moment. The Lakers really don't have one of those top deals. Like, they can make the money work, although it's going to lead to them gutting their depth. They're going to have to trade 3 out of the 4 of Rui, Reaves, Gabe Vincent, and Jared Vanderbilt, which isn't the end of the world. I think they can make that work alongside some draft picks. It's not the worst package in the world, but it's not going to be up to the tier of almost any of those teams that we talked about if they're interested in these same types of players. Also, we just saw the Phoenix Suns try a big 3 setup with Bradley Beal coming into town rather than trading for a number of role players to surround Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. And they crash and burn. They got swept by the Timberwolves, who the Lakers are going to want to try to compete with if they get back to championship contention level. So that's a little bit intimidating. We talked about how it went last time they tried to go for a star with Russ, which was a disaster deal for both sides involved. It's a really tough spot to be in. It's really complex. And even if they do make the perfect star trade, how do you upgrade the roster beyond that? Because those 3 guys aren't going to be enough to compete with the rest of the West. You have to keep high-level role players. They're already going to exhaust pretty much all their assets on that star trade. Can you bring in enough bodies to help you compete with teams like Denver, Minnesota, an improving Oklahoma City squad, Dallas? The Grizzlies are going to be back next season. A number of teams could make big upgrades and be better in the West. It's scary. This is your last chance to get things right. With Braun being 40 next season and only having a couple of years left, I know he still feels like he's impossible to stop. He is basically never going to regress, but he's not the best player in the world anymore, so you have to get more and more talent. AD is still really good, but he's going into his mid-30s and being injury-prone. How often is he going to be on the court? They got really lucky this year with a healthy season from him. Fingers crossed that continues to be the case, but there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee at all with this Lakers team. They could have a perfect offseason, and it still may not matter because of injuries and just things falling apart like they have for them ever since they won that first championship with this team. It's an incredibly intriguing offseason. I think both paths have their merit. Ultimately, I don't think I'd go down the 3rd star path. I would just try and get the best role players possible, see if you can make it work. If it's not working, maybe you go for a 3rd star at the deadline as just one last Hail Mary home run swing. But I think going for the 3rd star is going to blow up in their face like we saw with Phoenix, like we saw with the Russ trade, unless they find the perfect player who I just don't think is out there. And if that guy does become available, they're not going to have the package to match up with some of these other top teams. I just don't see the Lakers making that splash that returns them to championship contention this offseason. So while they've got a lot of interesting options, to me, I think this is just prolonging the inevitable, which is that the Lakers are no longer going to be competing for titles at the highest level like they wanted to with this LeBron and AD era. They got one, but I don't see a second one really in sight. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what they do this summer. I cannot wait to see what moves they make. For now, though, I do want to go ahead and move on to Thunder versus Pelicans. We saw the Thunder complete the sweep in this game, winning 4-0 in the series. First series win in 8 years, second sweep in franchise history, and they become the youngest team ever to win an NBA playoff series. As a Thunder fan, couldn't be happier. There were still a lot of people that for some reason thought the Pelicans stood a chance in this without Zion Williamson. Even without Zion, the Thunder were just the way better team, but with him it would have been more interesting at the least. Instead, the Thunder go out there and get the sweep, proving a lot of people wrong. And it never really felt close. Like, there were a couple games that were back and forth. Game one, of course, came down to the final shot. This one, the Pelicans kept it close for a majority of the game, even took a couple of 5-point leads late. But the Thunder eventually pulled away. Mainly, it was Jalen Williams, who has been dominating in fourth quarters all season. Had 24, 8, 4, 2, and 1, shooting 53%. Unbelievable in this game. Had a personal 8-0 run in those final 12 minutes. And just an incredible first playoff series from the second-year player, who, in my opinion, is already an all-star level guy and will sooner than later be on all NBA teams, or at the very least, competing for them. Shea had 24, 10, 3, and 2. Struggled to shoot in this one with all the pressure thrown at him. Also tweaked his ankle a little bit in the first quarter, I think, on the final shot. So I'm glad he's going to have a lot of rest leading into the second round series. Glad to see that. Chet Holmgren had 14, 9, and 5. Great series from him. Lu Dort continues to clamp. Brandon Ingram had 11 points in his own right. Ingram on the series averages right around 13 points per game, shooting around 34%. Terrible series from him, and a lot of that was the pressure of Lu Dort. Giddey hit multiple huge threes in this game, had one pull-up three that was a big-time, no, what are you doing to, oh my gosh, yeah, great shot type moments. Finished with 14 points, 4 deep balls. For some reason, just shoots incredibly well in New Orleans, always. It was a team effort. They held the Pelicans to under 93 points every single game, and I'm really excited about what's next. This was always, in my opinion, a formality. The Thunder were going to win in the first round, and now it's on to bigger and tougher opponents. We'll see what happens in Mavericks versus Clippers to decide who the Thunder will play, but for the moment, they're just going to be chilling. Wait to see who they play in the second round. As for the Pelicans, it now brings them to a summer full of question marks. What do you do with Brandon Ingram? Do you trade him? Do you keep him? It's the last year of his contract. Does this duo work? Their GM said in his season wrap-up interview this morning that they're going to be aggressive, that they're not going to be complacent. They have to get better, so maybe that involves a Brandon Ingram trade. How do you upgrade the big man spot? Jonas Valanciunas, in my opinion, is just not it. Had some good moments in this series, but got played off the court a lot of times. Will Zion ever be healthy? Not that that's a question they can answer, but it's one that maybe they should consider when building out this next era of the team. Do you keep CJ McCollum? Do you keep Willie Green as your head coach? A lot of things they have to think about, and for the moment, the season ends again in disappointment. And finally, we had Celtics versus Heat Game 4, which I don't have a lot to say about. The Celtics dominated like they have for most of this series, their third 14-plus point blowout. The only game where that didn't happen was the game 2 that they lost. It's the only game Miami's going to get. This is going to wrap up in 5. The Celtics are just the far better team, especially with Jimmy Butler sidelined and Terry Rozier dealing with an injury as well. Derek White went crazy in this game, 38 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. The big news is the Porzingis situation. He seemingly suffered a non-contact injury. He's been dealing with a calf strain, which for some reason there are so many calf strains across the NBA right now. It's insane. I don't know why it's going on, but hopefully everything's good with him. He also rolled his ankle seemingly a couple possessions beforehand, so maybe they're related. He came off the court, didn't come back into the game, which again, he didn't need to. It was a blowout. He tweeted out after the game that he's all right. There's no concern with his Achilles or anything serious according to Woj. I imagine he'll probably just sit out the next game, maybe for the first few games of the second round, where I don't even think the Celtics really need him to win the second round. They definitely don't need him to close out this series. So I think they'll go ahead and rest him as long as he needs until he comes back and the Celtics continue to be the best team in the East. Bam Adebayo had a great game in this one, 25, 17, and 5. Hero had 19, Caleb Martin had 18, just not much else from anybody. They've never had a great offense. It's even worse without Jimmy or Terry Rozier, and while the Heat did steal that one game and it was really fun, this one is going to be over in 5. But yeah, with all that being said, those are my thoughts from the games. Let me know what your big takeaways were. What do you think about the Lakers and their situation? Would you go ahead and trade for a star? Would you try and upgrade the role players? Would you just straight up go for a rebuild? Do you think this thing has run its course? I know some people that think that way. I myself have even thought about that at some moments. I think it's interesting. Would love to know your opinions on that. I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real One Say It Back.